Hello and welcome to CIC Start Online webinar here at Glasgow Caledonian University. My name is Branka Dimitrijević and I will moderate today's event. Our webinars disseminate outcomes of feasibility studies and academic consultancies that are undertaken by 7 Scottish universities in collaboration with small to medium-sized enterprises operating in Scotland. The focus of these studies is on sustainable building design and refurbishment. The project is funded by European Regional Development Fund and Scottish Government through Scottish Funding Council. This is a live event, so in the case of fire alarm, we will have to stop and then we will continue later, and you can join us if you can. But if not, you can always watch a video recording of this webinar in due course. Online viewers can start using chat facility to ask questions at any time during the webinar. Presentations will finish around 1:30 and then there will be around 30 minutes for questions and answers. If some questions cannot be answered during this time, we will forward your questions by email to our speakers and they will reply by email. We now offer a live transcription service as part of our online broadcast. The presentation is transcribed live in a pop-up window as the webinar takes place. By providing this service, we hope to make our webinars as accessible as possible. The instructions are provided in a login email that you have received this morning. So today's seminar or webinar title is Developing a Template for Quick Start Home User Guides. And the speakers are Matt Bridgestock and Rosalie Menon of Mackintosh Environmental Architecture Research Unit at Mackintosh School of Architecture and Stuart Young of Home Logbook Company. I will kindly ask now Matt to start with the presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon. There we go. Just get the technical thing going. Okay. So good afternoon. We're going to talk about the project that we worked on for the Quick Start User Guide. We've got Rosalie and Stuart. I'm going to start and talk through the methodology of the project and of producing the test guides. Okay. So for my part of the presentation, I'm going to look at a little bit of the background before we actually undertook this project, the things that had been done by other people and the things that the Glasgow School of Art had been undertaking. Something about some research that the Scottish Government the School of Art did with the Scottish Government, which then incorporated the need for a quick start guide into the building regulations as part of Section 7 for sustainability. We're going to look at the first stage of our research project with the Home Logbook Company was to look at the feedback from that and feedback from other people within the industry, look at how we develop the methodology, and then go through one of the quick start guides and bring out some of the key issues and key areas that we learnt from. Okay. So the research background to this study is MIRU have been doing, MIRU, which is the Mackintosh Environmental Architecture Research Unit, and that's based within the Glasgow School of Art, have been doing 20 years, at least 20 years of research into how buildings are occupied once they're built and the issues to do with reducing energy use, increasing, having a good, comfortable internal environment. And part of that research is to find that new homeowners and homeowners in general don't have a great deal of information as to how their house operates, and that this is becoming exacerbated by the range of technology that is being put into new buildings, particularly buildings heading towards on a low carbon, zero carbon agenda, with different types of heating system, maybe different types of ventilation system, different things to do with air tightness and so on. That's also backed up by work that's been done by BISRIA. BISRIA is the, Rosalie knows this. Anyway, I'll come to that. It's research that they've done on what happens to buildings after they've been occupied. So they've developed a soft landings project for non-domestic buildings, which helps people settle into the building. Once they've moved in, they settle in, they learn how all the systems work, and they and they help users understand how they work. There's also the Usable Buildings Trust, which is based in England but covers the whole of the UK, and they look at how buildings respond to the occupants using them, and how design and architecture can become better because the occupants intuitively understand how to operate the buildings. So all of this background research fed into the work that Meru did with the Scottish Government. The need for these quick start guides was identified because whereas maybe 10 years ago new homes in particular maybe had one or two different types of heating system depending on where they were, and one or two different types of a very simple ventilation system. With the low and zero carbon agenda and the changes of building regulations, there's a great deal more technologies. There's air source heat pumps coming in, there's ground source heat pumps, there's different electrical systems, there's different ventilation systems, and all of those come with very different controllers and a lot more control, a lot more buttons, a lot more screens, a lot more things to set. And they are also tied in with the issues around air tightness, and maybe they're tied in with a ventilation system, which again adds a level of complexity. And the research that the School of Art had been doing was finding that people had the equipment installed in the house, but quite simply didn't know how to use it to the optimum efficiency. Therefore, like an iPod, you get an iPod, and out of the box you get the iPod, you get a big thick user manual, but you also get a little one-page thing that says you turn it on at the top, you plug it in and install some music, and you press play here, and that's how it works quite simply. So like that, we saw the need for this user guide that gives you a very quick introduction. And in 2010, that was incorporated into the building regulations. It's the gold and silver standard are optional currently within the Section 7 of the building regulations. There's a section about optimizing performance, and the Quick Start Guide is a mandatory part of that. So if you are trying to achieve a silver or gold or platinum level within the building regulations, then you must produce a Quick Start Guide. The regulations say that you must produce that guide, a draft of the guide at application stage, and then a full version must be available for the building inspector at completion stage. So based on that and discussions with Property Logbook, Home Logbook Company as part of that process, they were one of the consultees we talked to during that process. We have taken that forward to look at how these guides can be done in practice, and what the issues are in implementing it across a wide range of different house types. This is a slide showing the initial Scottish Government building regulations guidance, and you'll see there are a couple of key points in that. It has to have a floor plan that's specific to the house, and it uses language that is conveys technical information in a non-technical manner. That's a particular point. So the proposal was to build on the Scottish Government research, investigate public and private projects, a number of projects, understand how to gather the information and what the issues are with gathering that information, review and survey the residents' views, and also review and survey the developers' views on those on these templates. In discussion with the Home Logbook Company and with Stuart, we selected two projects. The first one is Ogilvy Homes, project. It's 24 houses, 97 houses. We looked at 5 house types. They are designed in-house by Ogilvy. All the technical expertise comes from within house, and they're house types that they would then repeat on other sites. They meet a variety of different regulations. Obviously, we chose the ones that met the most recent regulations. We also worked with the GHA on 24 new social rented houses. They were architect design. We looked at 5 different house types of that. They met eco homes very good. So this guide is actually in addition to the eco homes guidance that's required, but is significantly bulkier as guidance. And it was an architect-led project. Again, that's quite important in coming to the information. So we already had from the Scottish Government template, we already had an example booklet that we had proposed and some design guidelines for that. So we tried to follow those design guidelines as far as possible. But we also wanted to make sure it fit the home logbook structure. And yeah, there's a typo on that sheet. That's the home logbook structure, and that it was easy for the 2 development partners to give us the information and to assemble this guidance. I'll just go through the front pages. The important thing about the front page is that it's also got the contents on it. So this is, and that shows some subtle differences. This is the original Scottish Government guidance, heating, ventilation, hot water, energy saving features, and keeping it working. If we go on to, we modified these slightly for both the GHA and for Ogilvy in different ways. So heating, ventilation, hot water are all there. They're common to all of the booklets. Sustainability and energy saving features, again, just a change of term to fit in with the GHA's own internal structures, and maintaining your home in the GHA one. Again, the maintaining your home in the GHA one has got a very particular view, because the GHA obviously factor and look after their own homes. So it's a different level of information. And the contacts information in this section was very important, so that people always had this this contact information to hand, so they could phone the GHA at any point. The Ogilvy one, again, heating, ventilation, hot water is there. Sustainability and accessibility to fit in with the issues that Ogilvy felt were important from the planning and design point of view. Maintaining your home, a slightly different focus, because the homeowners are owners, and it's their responsibility to maintain their home. And some key contacts, particularly for places they could find out further information, such as utilities companies and so on, to make sure they were on the best deal for their energy. So I'll just go through this. I don't know whether you can all see this, but the format for these guides is that it's a small kind of booklet that is meant to be kept in a kitchen drawer, so it's always handy. And that's one of the key things. We didn't want this to get into a big A4 document that is kind of put away out of reach. It's something that you can just keep in your drawer and just refer to. And that's one of the key issues about this template. The level of information is absolutely critical. To have information that is too technical means that most people can't get into it very easily. And if it's too simplistic and doesn't give you the answers to common things that you're trying to do with your house, then that's also a problem, because people will ignore it. So trying to get the right level of information was really important. And one of the things we found from the Scottish Government study is that the layout of the house, the particular layout of your particular house, has to be important, and it has to have all of these elements: the water stopcock, the extract fans, the boiler, the electric meter and gas supply, and so on. They have to be in the right place. And again, the interesting thing for this project was trying to do one book for a range of house types that may have things that move about slightly whilst they're on site. Maybe there's particular site issues that mean that the gas supply comes in the side of the house rather than the front. So trying to unpick that with both the GHA and Ogilvy was important, and obviously with Property Logbook, took Home Logbook Company. The other thing that we felt was very important is that very few people read plans easily, and to have some kind of three-dimensional graphic to help people navigate their way around their house and to be able to identify their house is very important. And this first page, these first pages, perhaps not so important, but certainly going through the booklet, it was important to locate things. And we'd also found that where there were particular issues, such as in a previous project we looked at sun spaces and different sorts of heating systems that, located in the attic or whatever, then that was really important to have a three-dimensional image so that people could orientate themselves on that. So the first couple of pages are quite simply the layout of the house and locating the key elements for that house. The second spread of pages, these are just so you can understand, these are spread across the pages like this, so the house isn't quite as cut off as that. The second set of pages was actually to tell people what their house was made of, which is an important aspect. It's timber frame, it's insulated with so much insulation. The windows are double glazed and timber and plastic, whatever. But actually to tell people the basic components of the walls, the doors, the roof, the windows and the floors. Very straightforward, non-technical language, but giving people enough information that they understand what that is. With things like the Green Deal and people upgrading and doing DIY in their house, this is really important that people actually understand where they're starting from, and they perhaps don't have a masonry cavity wall that you can just squirt more insulation in or whatever. Yeah, understanding what your house is made of. And that does have to be particular to that house or that project. I think that's very important. This is this is just a slide saying taking the Glasgow house in Lauriston and pointing out that actually for the three-dimensional plan was very important here, because how people use the sun space at different times of the day and where the building was insulated and where it wasn't insulated was important to get across to people, so that because the sun space isn't insulated in that particular instance. So special features in particular really need this three-dimensional view. And Rosalie will come to that in the results. Through the rest of the pages, the heating, the ventilation and the hot water, we had sketches or photos of the actual units that were in the houses. And each of the heating system, I'll just show this. Heating is 2 pages. It says what the boiler is, what the boiler controls are, it says what the thermostat is, and the TVRs that are on the thermo-regulating valves, or TVRs that are on the radiators, and how they work, and also how they're connected, and which one you turn on and off at which particular time, and what actually controls the heating system. It suggests some typical settings to help people set everything right, and it has some do's and don'ts which help people and lean people towards using the heating system more efficiently. And things like how, again, Miru and the School of Art research shows that there's quite a lot of people that feel they have an energy efficient house, but have the heating on at the same time as having all their windows open in the winter, and therefore have a very inefficient house in terms of their bill. They have an efficient house but with very high bills, and it's just a disconnect between how those two things work. So very simple information, some typical settings, and enough technical backup to enable people to find more information. I should also say one of the aspects of working with the Home Logbook company is that all of these little guides will come with access to an online database of the user guides to each of these different elements. So that's really useful to be able to say, well, actually, it's all online, and you can just go and find out more details about the exact way of controlling that thermostat and setting that thermostat. This is just a typical setting for you to start off with. Ventilation, I think ventilation is one of the areas that is of significant concern to Miro and the School of Art, in that we're finding that quite a lot of houses are quite poorly ventilated, even with the adequate ventilation according to the building regulations. People perhaps don't understand how to use trickle vents efficiently, extract fans, and when they should be used, and so on. So irrespective of the house, even if it doesn't have a fancy MVH, initially we conceived this because of the emergence of mechanical ventilation in homes, quite significant emergence. But I think irrespective, ventilation is an important aspect to include in this, even if it is fairly straightforward. Extract fans, roofs. Again, do's and don'ts, straightforward information. Another important thing is the location of all of these things. Where is your boiler? It may not be obvious in many houses, particularly with things like MVHR. Where is the MVHR unit? Is it in the loft? Is it in a cupboard? Is it hidden away? Sometimes these things are not obvious. And typical settings as well. Hot water, this is a fairly straightforward hot water system. A small diagram in, hold on, I've not got the other page to that. A small diagram in the middle, just showing very basically how it works. Not a schematic for the whole heating system, but the bits that people can change, the bits that people can see and understand. That's the important thing. Not all of the different pipes, and this is a blue pipe and this is a red pipe, just very simply how it all works together. Locations again, and also, is it different or is it included in the heating? The programmer, for instance, quite a lot of programmers are integrated with the heating system programmer. Maybe that's also got a thermostat in as well. It's quite a complicated little thing. So actually, where is the hot water setting for that? And what should I be trying to do? Obviously, if you have solar panels on the roof, there's a level of complexity there, or alternative heating system that is separate to your hot water system, perhaps. Then that could be quite a lot more complicated. And then in the Ogilvy books for private sector, and this is that's taken from the GHA book, but for both of them we included information about from the utilities companies that help people find out where they could get more energy saving advice, water saving advice, and we see that as being quite a useful kind of quick reference area, not detailed information, but just quick reference. And in the Glasgow Housing Association guides, they've got a service that is the Fuel Advisor service. So if you're having a problem with high fuel bills, you can phone them up and find out how you could reduce your fuel bills. So that's obviously a good place for this to be. Maintaining your home, that depended on each individual house type. Obviously, it took a great deal of advice from the developers and the architects for which bits need to be replaced and so on. But there are interesting things. Perhaps with MVH, again, MVHR is an issue. What do people do with it? How often do you replace filters? How often do you have to clean something? They're very general things, but it starts to give people an understanding of this bit needs replaced, or this bit will last 5 years or whatever. So that's very important. And some contacts, that depended. This is the Glasgow Housing Association project, but obviously Ogilvy have got a follow-up and aftercare service as well, so that goes in there. And now, after going through all of those, we issued those to a range of houses, and Rosalie undertook a survey and got feedback on the booklets, and she's going to talk you through that now.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, Matt's talked us through the process of creating these very bespoke guides for the housing project. And the next stage of the project was really to test these out in a real live situation. And the way that was done was by distributing the guides to 2 different housing developments, one in the public sector through the Glasgow Housing Association, and the other one being in the private sector with Ogilvy Homes. And so on both of those developments, after the logbooks were issued, we were able to distribute a little questionnaire just to try and assess how effective these guides had been for the residents, whether it improved their understanding of how to use their homes more efficiently. And the questionnaire targeted certain questions. We also looked at the timing and the distribution of the Home Starter Guide. We asked some probing questions about their understanding of the key information. We also asked their understanding of the heating and ventilation systems within their homes, and then sort of some general comments on the success of the guide. So these simple questionnaires were delivered either by hand, by post, or by a site agent or housing officer. And as Matt's already mentioned, it was one of the developments was with Ogilvy Homes, and it was a development in Stirling. It had was sort of quite high-end market detached homes, and there was quite a lot of variations on the logbooks that we created, so that each resident was getting a very bespoke guide which reflected their individual house layout. So we issued these questionnaires. We issued 25 questionnaires. We got 11 returned, but they were quite probing questions, and the feedback was very detailed. Likewise with GHA, it was a development in Tambowie Street in Anniesland, and GHA were very helpful in giving some details of residents that we could contact for some face-to-face interviews as well. And that allowed us to gain a wee bit more of an insight, some more sort of personal comments and feedback over and above the postal questionnaire that had gone out. So again, there was a variety of house types, and as Matt mentioned, very bespoke guides were created for each of those. As often is the case in social housing sector, a lot of the residents experience a sort of survey fatigue. So some of our responses on the postal side weren't as extensive as was hoped, but we certainly captured a good amount of quality feedback from the ones that we did manage to catch. Interestingly, a lot of the residents in the Tambowie Street development, English wasn't their first language, so it was quite an interesting body to survey, in that it really tested the logbook and the quality of its diagramming as opposed to just its English technical descriptions. So the results of the survey, one of the first questions we asked was when you actually received the Home Starter Guide, and the timing of receiving the guide is really quite critical. It's critical from a production point of view, because a lot of that information, some of it maybe can't be brought all together until quite close to the move-in date or the handover date. And then the timing of actually distributing it is critical, in that you don't want to leave it too long after they've moved in, because the whole idea is it's a quick start guide, so they're really responding to an immediate sort of move-in or entry situation. So they have to have that guide in their hand, certainly within the first week of moving in. Some residents in the survey actually commented that maybe the first day of moving in wasn't the best day. They had a lot of things, they had a lot of manuals, they already had a lot of information, and it had perhaps got lost within there. So there was also a debate, and there was some responses which indicated that there might even be a point at the inquiry of a purchase. Somebody from the private housing sector had indicated that it would have been a useful guide to have seen at the time of purchase, because it gave an overview of how the house was constructed. So there's a variety of sort of feedback there. The second question that we went on to ask in terms of the questionnaire was, who should actually, or who do you think is the best person to give you the Quick Start Guide? And those answers varied quite significantly. Within the social housing sector, obviously the housing officer was quite keen, was a key person in terms of a point of contact. It was somebody that they were, the new tenant was having a one-to-one conversation with and being shown around the house, and a lot of people felt that that was the person that should be giving them their guide. Likewise with Ogilvy Homes, it was maybe the salesperson. But the overall feedback was it should be someone who had time to explain it to them, and somebody also who knew the house type. Some of the feedback had indicated that they had maybe received a copy which was an inaccurate house layout, and perhaps that was an issue with whoever was giving it out, had maybe issued the wrong one to the wrong person. So that's when it becomes really critical. Important for the person with the guide that it is the correct one for their home, otherwise it begins to lose value if they look at it and feel that that's not reflective of their particular situation, then they maybe don't take so much value in it. We then went on to ask about who's actually read the guide in the house, and of course have all the adults actually read it. Whilst one person, and it could be the home occupier, has read it, but it's really everybody in the house who's in control or influencing the heating system should really be aware of the guide and having read some of the key information within that. I think we all know that teenagers in houses can often have a different opinion as to how much energy should be used, and often they're the ones that are using the most hot water and showers and washing. So not only all the adults in the house should really be having a look at that. We went on to ask, is it important to you to know how your house is built? Of course, we wouldn't buy a car without knowing, the size of the engine, whether it's a petrol, a diesel. So when we buy a house, our biggest investment, should we really know how it's built? And of course we should. And 78% said yes, it was important to them to know. And generally a lot of residents would take a greater responsibility of their home if they knew exactly how it was put together. We then went on and asked them about more detail, really just about how the guide was put together and how easy it was to understand. So the question of, did the floor plan layout help to understand the location of controls within your home? And 72% answered positive. Those who answered negatively confirmed that they had already located to them prior to reading the guide. So in effect, the sort of 72% would actually be higher. But a very sort of positive response. A lot of the additional comments indicated that the floor plan was clear, it wasn't cluttered, and a lot of residents also noted that the floor plan read in conjunction with the 3D sort of volumetric diagram, which Matt indicated there, was a very good way of understanding the location of certain elements within the house. This was especially the case in ventilation. A lot of residents had noted that they maybe weren't aware of what trickle vents were or what they should be doing with those or where they were located, and so that was particularly useful to have them located within a 3D diagram, which might not always be picked up on a plan. Overall, the understanding of key information gave a fantastic result. 100% of respondents noted that the information was clear and easy to read, and that the diagrams, again, were very, very easy to understand. So this was quite important, really, especially when we think that a section of our survey sample didn't have English language, so they maybe weren't able to read some of the accompanying text. So all the diagrams certainly seemed to be very easy to understand. Some of the comments included the colour coding of the sections, made it very easy as a point of reference. The text itself was easy to read and not too technical. On the flip side of that, some comments were also that, or one person commented that maybe it wasn't technical enough. And others indicated that the do's and don'ts boxes on each page really kind of managed to condense information into a very clear and concise set of instructions and advice. So we then went on to ask more detailed information about the heating system, and was that information specifically on the heating system easy to understand? 67% said it was. There was quite a few responded here to more the issue connected with the timer rather than the heating system itself. And the issue with the timer seemed to be that it was quite technical, especially ones in the housing association block had kind of asked neighbours or asked the housing officer and had to seek additional information. And of course the point of the guide, as Matt indicated, is it wasn't necessarily to give an overly complex or technical set of instructions, but to refer, be a point of reference to a manual which is located, elsewhere, or in the case of the home logbook company, accessible through the website. But certainly that was the one point of information which came up quite as a common theme. It also maybe is an indication that we're living in a time when a lot of these technologies are maybe not as intuitive as they could be in terms of their usability, and maybe there's an issue there that these could be maybe streamlined into a more sort of broad approach as to how they operate. Was there any parts of the Home Start Guide which were not clear? And again, this really just raised issues with the more sort of technical devices such as timers, anything which has got quite a high level of control. But again, and as the Scottish, the guidance from the Scottish building regulations indicates, that these guides shouldn't really be about going into high levels of technical detail. But overall, quite positive responses, again indicating that satisfaction with the clear diagrams and the 3D images of the house. And a very general sort of question was at the end of the survey about how helpful was the Home Starter Guide overall. And I think we can see from that point of view, we had 72% giving good, 17% giving excellent as a rating. And that was really quite a positive response. Also, comments that came alongside that was they were particularly keen or glad to receive information on the sections on maintaining your home or gaining more information about energy efficiency. So I think there was a feeling that it was a very complete document, and an understanding as well that it was a quick start guide. It wasn't an overly complex technical document, but it was a set of broad guidelines as to how to use your home in an energy efficient manner. And of course we then went on to say, well, where is the guide now? Where have you put it? And of course, as you can imagine, some people didn't know or couldn't find it. But majority of people certainly had put it, they kept referring to something called the Blue Guide, which must be a document that or a folder that they put all their technical information into. And quite a few people, which was our intention, was really to still be keeping it quite nearby, either in a sort of kitchen cupboard or a drawer. And as Matt indicated, the size of it, it's quite a handy size. The ones that we'd created were kind of A5, so it's half an A4, so it was a size that could be kept in a fairly handy location. And that was particularly important, especially in the social housing sector, where the tenant, the turnover of tenants is really quite important, and being able to make sure that that guide is passed from one tenant to another. So that was the sort of the outline of the questionnaire. What did we really conclude from that? I think the main points really were regarding the timing of the distribution of the Quick Start Guide, that was really quite critical. The distribution of the guide should be done by someone with knowledge of the house type. It shouldn't maybe be done anonymously in the post. It should definitely be somebody who's got time to explain it, or somebody who's certainly got a knowledge of the exact house type that they are moving into, so that these can be matched up with the appropriate bespoke guide. It should clearly direct residents to the appropriate heating manual. The issue of heating systems and timers and controls certainly was one that kept arising throughout the questionnaire. So clarifying that to the resident, that it wasn't meant to be a technical guide, but something which did direct them to the more detailed manuals. And the other conclusion really would be that the bespoke guide should match their individual house type. The guides should give simple and practical advice about maintaining aspects of the house which ensure energy efficiency. And finally, the guide should be kept in an accessible location and passed on to the next homeowner. And I guess that would conclude where we think we are. Matt indicated that, of course, in a lot of new build housing, it's becoming particularly critical because there are a lot of new technologies within housing. There are different mechanical heating systems, mechanical recovery, and really, giving people the knowledge of how systems work and a broad principle of how they should be dealing with this additional sort of body of technical devices that are in their house is really quite important. And I guess another test to this pilot study would be to see whether the homeowner over the course of a year has actually used their home more efficiently than somebody who's not received the guide. And I think that's an interesting dimension as well. Of course, a lot of it is down to user habit, consumer behaviour. We can give that information and then have to wait and see how much of it is actually absorbed, or whether habitual behaviour will still predominate. I'll hand over to Stuart Young now from the Home Logbook Company, who'll maybe just talk a wee bit about how the project has moved on to another phase and where the product might be and within his company as well. Sure.
Thanks very much. The Home Starter Guide fits very much in with our business in terms of dealing with new house builders and social landlords. This slide is really just to try and highlight how it fits into our product suite of when a person moves into a property. We know that as technologies become more complex, and indeed properties are becoming more complex, either through regulation and normal development, occupants of properties need a lot more information. And they need that information not within the first month or two of moving in, but within the lifetime of the property. We've seen that when people move into properties, they're given huge amounts of information through large, very often cumbersome handover manuals, which fulfil a need for the housing association or indeed the new house builder. And we know from research that's been carried out that tenants and occupants of properties don't read these large manuals. So what we've done is had a look at how information is given to people, when it's given to them, and most importantly, what different media do they use to access information. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is the reduction in the use of print media when people move into a property as an occupant. So what we try and do is deliver information to people as an occupant of a property using the web, mobile phones, and on digital TV. So what we're trying to do is deliver the content and information to people in a way that suits them and the most convenient way for them. The Home Starter Guide really is a key component part of what we're doing now, because it fills a very big gap of the timing of when a tenant or a new home buyer moves into a property and until such point that they're settled into the home that they have the time to access information. Because as already has been highlighted, that initial period of moving into a property, there's a lot going on, and giving people handover manuals or large folders really is not fit for purpose. And we're seeing an increasing shift in change and understanding and mindset of social landlords and indeed some new home buyers who are embracing that change of philosophy. This slide is really a quick slide to show the relationship between people and properties, because a lot is going on in and around a property, and there's a lot of expectations on people now in properties of what they can't do and what they must and must not do. Research shows that occupants do not get a single customer view or a single view of their property, and we've seen this particularly in the new build sector, where information comes from a variety of different sources. And through a variety of bits of research, NHBC Foundation, for example, produced some research that showed that people, one of their big complaints was they weren't given enough technical information about their property. They got a lot of nice marketing information, but not technical enough. Conversely to that, another criticism was where house builders were giving far too much technical information that made it difficult for the occupant to actually understand it and take in that information. And as Rosalie pointed out, the timing also becomes a big issue there as well. But we can see that when someone moves into a property, there's a lot going on in and around them about energy efficiency about the property, about managing the property, and about what their roles and responsibilities are. And it's very important in that early stage of setting expectation of consumer behaviour of what someone should and should not do when they move into that property, and also understanding how that property should be managed. It's very much like when you buy a car, you do go through a process of understanding what you should do to that to the car. And indeed, we're seeing in a lot of new cars now, digitally it'll come up and tell you when it's due a service. And the same is arguably the same for properties, where people are not given that information of when they should carry out certain types of maintenance and repairs or changing over on mechanical heating systems. To talk about this project in particular, with working with GHA in the social housing sector and Ogilvy Homes in the private housing sector, there are very common similarities in the process of people moving into a property, from when they first start looking for the property, to inquiring, to purchasing or to rent it, to moving in and then settling into the home. The process of when the information is given is quite often the wrong time. The NHBC research, for example, found out that the timing of that was wrong. People quite often wanted information prior to moving into the property, and when they do move in, their access to technology, for example, is quite limited. So what we identified, and where the Home Starter Guide really does fit in, is that quick start guide is given to them within the first few days or week of moving into the property. And that information is very much about settling into the home and getting started. And as Matt highlighted there are many other products and services when you think that you buy now that don't come with large, cumbersome manuals. They just come with a quick starter guide, and then later on, as someone gets used to the product, they will seek out more information. And the same applies for properties as well. The handover manuals that are given are too large for people to read and take in, and that's the most important thing, is about actually absorbing the information in there. And quite often technical information is hidden amongst other more customer care or marketing-led information, which for the occupant who's looking for something quite specific can get often very frustrated with. Examples of how we're using this Home Starter Guide and how it's fitting across different areas now, which really is a key component to what we're doing, is, for example, on existing properties, we're working on the largest Green Deal project with Birmingham City Council, and that's looking at upgrading 200,000 properties over the next 12 years. And you can see what they're looking at doing here is, when they spend this amount of money on their properties and they have an occupant in the property, they need to change the behaviours of that occupant to understand what has been done to that property, so that then they will manage the property in the way the upgrades have been designed to do. And that could be from PV cells to cladding to any number of different new technologies put into the project. So the Home Starter Guide really does lend itself to existing properties that are going through an upgrade or an event against that property. The other side of it is we're working with Land Securities here in Glasgow. They have a lovely new development on Buchanan Street, and the same issue there on the new build. They want to put together a very quick, simple starter guide for their new buyers. Combined with that, though, they're looking at even putting in a CD into the back of the Home Starter Guide. So the Home Starter Guide itself is quite flexible in terms of what you can put into it. We've seen in new builds, this is a perennial problem actually, the information, and not to dwell too much on the point, but as the new builds now through regulation, they are more complex in how they're built and the technologies and the materials used within the properties, and there's a greater onus of responsibility on that owner to learn and understand how to manage that property. So what we're trying to do is try and identify here that it does apply to new properties but also existing stock as well. And it's all about how information is given to someone, when it's given to them, and hopefully changing a behaviour. And that's really what a lot of this is about. Whilst the home logbook is a digital record of that property and has huge amounts of information in it that enables an occupant to access that information at their leisure, and most importantly, when it's more convenient for them, as opposed to going through the handover stage when there's many other things going on in and around the property. So the feedback we've had from the market, we started showing the Home Starter Guide to developers and housing associations, namely in England, and initial responses were incredibly positive, from saying this could save us a huge amount of time and effort and money because people aren't reading large handover manuals. They saw it as something that was more accessible and easier to give to a new occupant of a property. And indeed, two different house builders highlighted that they thought it was an educational tool for their own sales staff. It helped to educate them about the property as well. I think one of the challenges, though, that we find in the first instance from house builders was how the information is brought together and who the responsibility that lies with. And we had a lot of mixed responses about that. But I think if we looked at other industries or other sectors like technologies and cars, it's quite interesting to note that it's not generally marketing people that put this information together. It's technical people, because the Home Starter Guide in itself is meant to be a technical document. And maybe that says something in itself. There were some challenges from house builders who are working under the current economic climate about getting the right information into the Home Starter Guide, because they're not necessarily selling off stock now. Buyers of properties are increasing their demands or changing their demands on the house builder to make slight changes within the property that they want to buy. And that makes it a bit more difficult to get the Home Starter Guide ready for the new occupant within the first few days, week of moving in. And I think within the social housing sector it is a lot easier there, because at the planning stage the property is not going to change. And the same again when the property's been upgraded, they're planning these upgrades so they know what they're going to do. So the timing issues there are quite important there. So I think overall, from our perspective, this has been a fantastic project for us, learning and understanding and getting the Glasgow School of Art to do this work for us and into the sector, has helped us in terms of our understanding of how we put information together for not just the initial moving in period of an occupant into a property, but through the whole lifetime of that property. Okay.
Thank you very much, Stuart and Rosalie and Matt. So we now have time for questions and answers, and while we are waiting for questions from our online viewers, I have prepared some questions. This Home Starter Guide was developed and tested on new properties. Do you believe that it would be useful to be developed for existing properties? You mentioned the example of Birmingham, where Green Deal finance scheme is being used to refurbish existing homes. But in principle, people move from, let's say, a modern property into 19th century property, where they have to learn how to use that property and what the specifics are. Have you done any work in that area? Have you developed any starter guide, or do you plan to develop?
I think it's a very good question. It's easier to put a Home Starter Guide together when an event takes place against a property, when it's built or upgraded. I think on existing stock it's a bit more challenging because information has been lost through time. And what we've had a look at and tried to look at is again going back to using that event. If something is done against the property, even if it's an extension against the property, that creates the opportunity to put a guide together because work is being done and allows you to capture that good quality information.
There's also an issue in traditional buildings in that they were intended to be occupied in a certain way. For instance, Glasgow tenements were intended to have a fire in each room as a radiant heat source rather than trying to heat the whole of the building up to 21 degrees C. And so if you do make a big change like putting in a central heating system or insulation or whatever, actually the way that people use that property will adapt to that new thing, and the current owners will need that information. Maybe they've gone through the process, maybe they understand it, but the next owners and the owners after that will need that information as well, and to say that this isn't your standard Glasgow tenement or your Victorian villa or your terraced house or whatever. This has had some changes, and this is how it works now, and this is how you can get the most out of, particularly the Green Deal. How can you get the most out of that to save the money that these upgrades were meant to save?
Here is a question from Gary Mees of Architectural Technology. Whilst I understand this document mainly is dealing with sustainability, but do you see this document encompassing health and safety issues, i.e. smoke detectors and means of escape, and the maintenance of the building? Any thoughts of ensuring these documents are current when alterations are made, and who would be responsible, and how it might be legislated for, or should it?
I'll answer that from the starting point of this. The starting point of this was that this research we did for the Scottish Government, and they were quite clear that this was about sustainability, because we had a very protracted discussion about whether health and safety, whether things such as houses have fire escape windows identified as part of the design process, but they are not identified to the people who live in them necessarily. So should that kind of information be in the guide? The Scottish Government project said no, it's about energy and it's about efficiency and so on. But my feeling is that at the right level, that information could be incorporated into this. There's kind of pros and cons. The pros are obviously there's more information and health and safety information, health and safety kind of age. That's good. The cons are the idea of this guide is to be thin and easily readable. If you add another 4, 8, 10 pages, you go beyond the kind of information that can be comprehended in a quick and easy thing. So it's a balance. There may be situations that it's really useful, but I think keeping it as a short, easy read, referring people to other places is actually more important.
I think Matt's right. From a very practical level, you've got to remember this is just a start guide. And I know we had feedback from one house builder who felt that this guide was too simple for their customers, which I thought was an interesting bit of feedback. I think the reality is people just want a quick start guide, and if you make this too big and too thick, it will actually in fact put people off. So it really is about getting them started, and with the property having some kind of digital record around it like a home log book, you can have then all that other more in-depth technical information for them that they can then read and access at a later stage.
A question from John Stinson of Scottish Energy Centre. Along with a quick guide, was each house fitted with direct, easy release adhesive labels on all key heating and ventilation equipment? And he refers here to section 7, gold aspect 5.
Yes, yes, and well spotted. That was certainly the outcome of the initial research, as I say, that we did for Scottish Government. The outcome that improved people's understanding of where things were in these guides we did concentrate on plans and 3D information, and there was also the issue of timing and getting these guides out when on the day of the house is being complete. If you put a sticker on everything, if you go back 3 months after someone's moved into the house and put stickers on everything, that's not quite the way. So there's a timing issue to that, but there's also trying to make the information in the document a bit clearer to cover the fact that those stickers hadn't been done in all of these properties. So I don't know whether you.
I suppose, just from a personal view, would you want stickers sticking off everything in your house? You wouldn't have it in your car. So I think there becomes a practical issue and an aesthetic issue there.
The other thing is, I think the feedback wasn't that people couldn't locate these things. So actually, the feedback kind of reinforces the decision.
Could you tell us, please, Stuart, when did home logbook companies start providing online service to residents? How much experience do you have in this area?
We started in 2007, specifically in just the new build sector. But the problem was when the downturn in 2008 had a serious adverse impact, and we found then that we had to look at a different sector. So in 2011, we did a huge shift across looking to the existing housing stock, and that was very much the RSLs and housing associations. And I think what was quite interesting there was the feeling of the people the landlords, because they actually owned the properties and needed to look at ways in which they managed their assets over a 30-year period, which is quite different. The attitude, the approach is quite different from a new home buyer who may only own the home, I think, on average every 7 years. And we've done it now for over 37,000 properties. And what we've done more recently as well is we've now got a partnership agreement. We're now working in Australia, where we're looking at there where the logbook actually applies to properties very much driven by energy issues. It is arguable, I think, in many respects in Australia their market is more advanced than ours when it looks at energy and sustainability, especially around water and sunlight, and the issues there by people moving into properties as well. So the potential for this is, it doesn't matter where your property is or what country you live in or what kind of property, the same issues apply whether you're an owner, a tenant, a landlord, and in what country.
So how many people, how many homes currently use online system that you provide?
It's around 38,000 homes we've created logbooks
So
for.
you have really a large markets to cover in the future.
We do. I mean, just it is worth highlighting as well is the logbook itself. When you look at just property information, you have to look at how interesting is it for an owner and what drives them back to go back to that information. So when there was a slide there I showed that talked about the relationships between a person and a property, that relationship changes over periods of time, and you need to look at ways in which you keep information updated for that owner or occupant of the property and how they interact with that information and making that information available to them in different media.
Just a related question. How do you assess the effectiveness of the online advice service that you provide?
There's a number of different ways of doing this. One is through improved customer service. We know that, say, for example, in the new home buying sector, that a lot of complaints from new home buyers about getting access to information and information that they're actually given. This NHBC Foundation research highlighted that, if I may read something out of this, that homeowners are usually unaware of what information they should be receiving, and they felt that a generic list of what to expect would have been beneficial, especially since missing literature or information only becomes evident once a problem occurs. And looking at that, just building on that,
Well, how do you really
So
assess
the
whether
customer
users
feedback on that is
yes.
looking at reduced callbacks when people are calling for information. The other thing is looking at improved energy management of the property. So one of the things that we do now is we do smart metering, and for example, we're doing the largest energy and water efficiency project within the social housing sector in Scotland, And one of the areas that we'll be able to measure out of that is people's reduction in use, more prudent use of energy, so it doesn't have an adverse impact on their life, so we can manage that. Improved reactive and planned maintenance. This is very much in the social housing sector, looking at how the logbook is used to help landlords and contractors access information prior to going out to property and managing the property over the lifetime. So it's about improved management and reduced cost. And very much one of the projects we're working on is very much about the behavioural change of the occupant of that property, of their understanding of how to use the property. I was told recently that a lot of new technologies put into properties don't always act the way that they're meant to act, and we need to look at that. Is it the technology's fault, or is it the way that people are using the actual technology and how people are educated about that technology? So we can look at behaviour change around the property, and if we look at the Green Deal project, for example, I think that is very much about behaviour change, about if a landlord is spending £1.45 billion over a 12-year period on 200,000 properties, they want to make sure that the occupants use those properties and understand how the properties are managed. I think they're the main areas. Actually, there are some financial aspects of which you can measure the return on investment in terms of we've seen the costs associated with large handover manuals. Whilst they look lovely and they fulfil a provider's need, they're not always fit for purpose for the occupant of the property. So that's another way of getting the response back from the occupant of the property as to the effectiveness of that. So there are a variety of different ways of measuring the success.
Just there's a couple of views on how you view this kind of document. Either that the building has been designed in a way that the occupier can't use without that information, and so you have to give them that information. And Stuart's talked about that, but I think there's another angle in that, if the designer is preparing this information, then actually they are thinking about how the person, and have to think about how the person who lives in this property is going to use the property. And so there is an unquantifiable area where the property is just improved because someone has gone through quite carefully and decided and written out how they think, how the property should be used, and identified areas that are just a real problem. And we'll keep going back to programmers and timers and thermostats. They are, they're of the number we've seen. There's very few that people can just pick up off the shelf and understand how to use it intuitively, and that's the Rosalie's figures on the feedback. I mean, that's just showing these are a problem. Perhaps we shouldn't be specifying the ones that are difficult for people to understand.
Yes. So there are multiple benefits really of developing this type of guidelines and providing also information online. Let's go to other questions from our online viewers. Again from John Stinson of Scottish Energy Centre. I'd like to know the speaker's opinion on including the EPC as part of the Quick Start Guide, Energy Performance Certificate, EPC.
Yes. I'll answer that first of all, but I would say that there has been a protracted discussion about that between ourselves, the different developers, certainly with the Scottish Government. My own personal view is that kind of information is part of the House and it should be there somewhere. However, there are other views about, mainly around the reliability of EPCs and the fact that then you are giving people figures that are notional figures that you can actually compare a bill to. Okay, so you can compare an electricity bill to your EPC and say, oh, my house is not performing or is performing. I think that's a benefit. There are other parties that think that is a liability. I think that kind of information. That's my own personal view. We haven't put it in the guide as a result of the discussion.
I think in answering the question, the EPC is a very arguably important part of the property. But how valuable is it within a home starter guide? Because quite often the EPC will be given to the buyer of a home at a different time, or to be as part of the marketing literature. It's a bit like buying a car when it tells you about miles per gallon. And it's going back to what is the purpose of the home starter guide. It's really about just telling them how to run a few of the key things within their property and settling into their property. The logbook itself, the home logbook itself, will store the EPC and all other kinds of information like that that people will want to look at a later stage. So the Home Starter Guide and the work that has been done is clearly identifies what are the key bits and important bits of information that you give to someone as they become the new occupier of a property. I think we also know that the EPC itself is arguably quite difficult to interpret and understand, and we saw DEC made recent changes to the EPC, and I think that's quite telling in its own right. And that's not to be negative about the EPC, it's about the appropriateness of it and when it's given.
Thank you. Here is a question from Gloria Law of OISA Designs. Thank you to the speakers and the clear explanation. I agree that the guide should be kept simple and legible, but the starting point and the cover guide to the building manual or the many other manufacturers' guides to the bits and pieces of house. However, I'm wondering whether the maintenance checklist could include other aspects that need regular attention, such as painting timber or windows or clearing of gutters, etc., without making the guide too thick, but just having it in the checklist.
I think that this is a very valuable point, and this was something Matt, you might want to expand on as well, but it was interesting with Ogilvy Homes. We spent a lot of time debating this about what kind of maintenance information do you give someone. And the problem is you don't know who you're dealing with, who that occupant will be, and their ability to carry out certain types of maintenance. And unfortunately, one of the other issues was the old health and safety issue of you can tell someone that they have to clear out their gutters, but if that's on a two-storey or a block of flats, that's not the right information to give them. But it's a very important bit of work that should be carried out on the property. And to be honest, I think it's a very difficult one to answer.
Yeah, I think the Home Starter Guide has made a start at that. I think there's a long debate about what's included, and probably with specific providers. Glasgow Housing Association would have very different advice to Ogilvy Homes, or all the different providers in between. So I think it's a very valid point. It is certainly a key part of the guide, but exactly what that contains, gutters are a good one, timber is a good one as well, but exactly what it contains is down to the individual building type and the person who is giving that advice and their view.
I think another important aspect is, some of these technologies, and we know now, with a lot of these technologies, parts do need replaced or they're not going to work. And research that we've done, on new homes with the MVHR systems, if filters aren't replaced, then the systems aren't working properly at all. So there's very critical sort of guidance that needs to be given, but it maybe doesn't need to be. I think the wording of that needs to be particularly careful and considered, and an idea of what needs done at what time and by whom is maybe quite an important aspect.
Could we imagine, for example, probably it's feasible to receiving an email from Home Log book and alerting us to change or clean the filters on the ventilation system?
Yeah, no, you're right, and I think, as Matt highlighted, there's two different issues here. Within the social housing sector, it is arguably they really don't want tenants to mess around with the properties, and they have maintenance people who will carry out this work and will have planned maintenance programs. In the private housing sector, yes, there is an opportunity there where you can push out information to people based on when they've moved in, so that within a year that they will carry out certain work. I think a very good point in that you've made, Brian, is about warranties. That certain technologies or products within the home, if they're not maintained on a regular basis, they fall out of warranty. And it's about pushing that information to people, making sure that they're aware that they have to change the filters or get their central heating boiler serviced on an annual basis.
Just the example I showed is not the final, or is not one of the GHA ones, but the GHA, I'll give you the list of the things that we put in the final version of the GHA one. Was every week to check the smoke alarm, every 6 months to vacuum the smoke alarm and clear the dust, every year to make sure there's a boiler check by a registered gas safe engineer, and to clear the leaves and the gutters. So those are the kind of things. It kind of goes back to the earlier question about health and safety and CDM and so on. Smoke alarms and gas, safety things actually came into maintaining your home rather than anywhere else specifically.
Here is a question from John Stinson of Scottish Energy Centre. Taking up the point of persistent effect and behaviour change, is it essential that the Quick Start Guide is accompanied by a real-time energy monitor to use language like pounds per day, etc.?
This has been quite interesting. We've been doing a lot of work on energy meters and monitors, and you have to look at, research has shown that when people are given smart metering of some kind, they're given an in-house display in IHD, and unfortunately we find that people lose interest in those very quickly and they become ineffective. And it's going back to what we said at the beginning about what we do is about delivering information to people in a format that is useful and appropriate to them. So using the web or mobile phones, mobile phone apps, or indeed digital TV. And I think if you can deliver that information in the right channel, then it will have an impact. I think the other thing that Matt pointed out about is about you've got people in homes and they will treat the home in a different way, and it's very difficult to compare a semi-detached house with another semi-detached house when you have a different structure and economic status and social and makeup of the household of that property, because different people will have the heating on and the windows open, conversely, or run hot water at the wrong times or do their washing at different times. And there's so many influencing factors that it's very difficult to compare, I would argue, like for like on metering.
So there's a slightly wider issue here, and there's kind of impacts on the discussion about EPC. It certainly impacts on post-occupancy evaluation and monitoring of houses to make them better. But use the example that we monitored, the School of Art monitored 2 identical houses next to each other in a terrace. That both of the occupants answered in a survey. They said they were both very energy efficient houses, but one was using 2.5 times more energy than the house next door for a similar makeup. And I think even if they had a monitor that told them pounds per day, what's the benchmark? What's the benchmark for this house normally is an issue, and that's like saying, is my car getting 50 miles a gallon or whatever? And I think that is an issue. It's a wider issue, and I don't think we answer it in this, but it's certainly for further discussion.
I think the problem with meters like that is also there's no call to action. There's no follow-up. It tells you how much energy you're using. And we use the analogy of your car tells you you're doing 30 miles an hour, but you still drive at 40. We all still break that speed limit. So what's the call to action? What's the follow-up? And as Matt says, something like the Home Starter Guide isn't going to answer that question.
Thank you very much. We don't have any more questions from our online viewers, but could you tell us anything at the end or the conclusion or the way forward, how you see further development of this type of, let's say, online tool, or further research that you are planning?
Yes. Well, I think ongoing the work at Miru, we're doing a lot of building performance evaluation. We're identifying a lot of issues with regard to user behaviour. We're identifying that there's a lot more technologies that are being introduced into housing, that there's a big drive towards mechanical ventilation, and I think we are beginning to see that there's very much a place for this type of document in new build home, and it really is a case of trying to change that sort of user behaviour, and I think this is a really good stepping stone to get there. I mean, I think actually it's very good that the Scottish Government and the Building Standards Division have introduced that into Section 7, but it's an optional standard just now, and if it were to go to another step where it becomes something that's more mandatory, then that really would be fantastic. I think it would be a great step towards getting people to really think about how they use their homes, really informing them in quite, as we've demonstrated, quite a sort of simple, short, effective, well communicated manner.
I think from our perspective as a commercial sense, what Mary did was great for us because it helped us to realign our thoughts. And it was interesting, I spoke to Ogilvy Homes this morning and got their view and their quote was that this is absolutely a great idea to fit in with their business. I think the challenge for the new build sector is looking at how they embed it into the business, because they would have to change their processes and procedures a little bit, and putting that into as part of their handover process. This research has really identified how it can fit into that process, and we see it as very much, from a commercial perspective, having a long-term benefit, and I hope over time that this will evolve in many different ways.
Thank you very much for your presentations and answers. I would like also to thank to our online viewers for asking questions, and I would like to draw attention of everyone to our forthcoming events. The next webinar that we will have will be on 25th of October, and the title is Options Appraisal Tool for Architects. This is the study that was undertaken by University of Strathclyde, Glasgow for node architecture. Following that, we will have a conference, well, really before that, on 4th of October, we will have a conference on eco and energy efficiency improvements in hard-to-treat housing. That's tomorrow, from 9 o'clock to 2 in the Lighthouse in Glasgow. And this is a live event. There will be no online transmission. Last-minute places for exhibitors are available, so please contact us immediately after this webinar if you are interested in exhibiting tomorrow. And another conference on 24th of October is on security of electricity supply, demand-side management, and smart grid strategy. That will be again in the Lighthouse. That's a live morning event from 9 to 2 o'clock. We look forward to welcoming you at these events, and I would like to thank you for watching this webinar. Thank you.